Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of Cruel and Beautiful, I the Dragon, Rabbit Hole, and King Dio. Following the Nintendo Direct, I was super stoked about a wide range of all sorts of different games, from Kirby to Super Smash Bros. To Metroid Dread. I was very, very pleased with most of what they showed. And there were two major exceptions to that, two glaring things that really stuck out to me as just being a bit of stuck out like a pair of sore thumbs, you could say. First of all was like Bayonetta 2, and I'll probably get to that in another video, because I think that kind of does deserve its own video, but that was the thing I spent the most time on during my reaction, talking about what I thought of the Direct and things like that. The other thing, and I think this is probably the bigger thing, like culturally, like in a gaming sense, is Deltarune Episode 2. An announcement so terrible and so like out of place that I actually clicked off the Direct and started talking about other things that Nintendo had already announced, because Deltarune needs to be ignored. It needs to fuck off. It needs to go away. Toby Fox is not a game developer. He has no credibility. And if it wasn't for his cock-sucking enabling fans, he wouldn't have credibility. Like that's all Toby Fox is just a narcissist with somewhat of a following. Like no different than the Spoony one or Aaron from Game Grumps, right? Like that kind of persona. Someone with no real game design, with no real ability at designing video games, like being heralded as one of the all-time greats, like one of the all-time best indie devs, when really I wouldn't even put Toby Fox in the same level as someone like Phil Fish. Like Phil Fish, he worked on games, like he made Fez, right? He made he made a handful of licensed games. Like Phil Fish, of all people, has more credibility than Toby Fox at this point. I talked before, right? I think a couple of days ago, about how like Deltarune clearly is suffering a decline in popularity, right? Like compared to like the original Undertale release. Like you can see online that like Undertale content isn't nearly as popular as it used to be. Like the few YouTubers who are trying to milk Undertale for views aren't getting the reception they used to get years and years ago, because I think by and large, the Undertale audience has grown up. They've moved on. They're playing other games. They've maybe found other creators they like more. Like I don't think Undertale is the sort of experience that will really stick with people for a long period of time. It was, in essence, nothing more than a fad. Nothing more than a fad that has long overstayed its welcome. However, the thing that sets Undertale apart, like from other fads like it, stuff like Twilight and stuff like that. Well, I suppose Twilight is no different in this regard. Is that there are like hardcore dedicated enthusiasts. I don't want to call them fans. You have a dedicated group of people who legitimately seem to believe that Undertale is everything that it was hyped up to be, that it was one of the best JRPGs ever made, that Toby Fox is a genius savant, and that he's hyper successful in everything he does, that he's incredibly popular all over the world, and and that he's the person that people dream they could be, like creators like me could dream they could be. But Fox's success, and I really do mean this, it's very hollow. It's very shallow. Like, it's very materialistic. It's very... Do I personally want to be Toby Fox? And the answer, like, seeing, like, how he conducts his life, how he, like, handles his relationships, how he uses his money, like, what he's done since Undertale, is a resounding no. Toby Fox is someone who essentially latched on to a particularly autistic group of people on the internet, pandered to them, got his name attached to a extremely autistic brand, the Homestuck fan base, and used that sort of appeal to catapult him to success in the gaming sphere, in spite of the fact that his primary audience doesn't care about or talk about video games. And that's the thing that's the thing that really interests me about this situation, because like when you compare Deltarune's reception to like all the other things that have been announced, all the really hype announcements from like Bayonetta 3 to Metroid Dread to Animal Crossing, like there are all these like major announcements, like Disco Elysium, like lots of other indie games got announced. You don't see the fans of those games going onto 4chan and trying to say that like, oh man, it's a big deal that Deltarune is in a Nintendo Direct. Like you don't see like other fans of other properties coming on here and going on message boards and trying to say that like Deltarune is having a spot in a Nintendo Direct is a big deal. Like you don't see other fans like of other properties saying that like having a Mii costume in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate makes you like a big shot, right? You don't see other fans like saying that like having a working relationship with Nintendo or Sakurai himself is some kind of big deal, like makes you out to be a celebrity. You see Undertale fans do that, right? What I'm trying to get at here is that Toby Fox has kind of manufactured this image around himself into convincing his fan base, his audience, that he's some big success story, that he's some big deal, particularly in Japan and with like these Nintendo developers, when he's really not. Like, I've done a little bit of digging into like the popularity of Undertale and stuff like that. Like, people always point to these concerts that are held in Japan. Like, you can pay to have those done. Like, I legit think Fox is probably doing that himself and just using that for like publicity, so people can just say that Toby Fox, holy shit, people are performing Toby Fox's music in Japan. Like, you have situations like this Nintendo Direct where it feels like Deltarune is far from the far from the most anticipated announcement on there, right? Because the game has been out for a while, nobody really cares about it. It kind of floundered. I've talked about this before. It gets announced in the Nintendo Direct. And I immediately go to the Nintendo page, right? I look at the Nintendo Direct. I go on like the news tab in the Nintendo Switch. You know how they have the news icon on there and things like that. I'm scrolling through all the games and I notice, like, for some inexplicable reason, that Deltarune, out of all the games they announced, from Metroid Dread to like Mario Golf Super Rush to all this other stuff, like all this major big stuff, Bayonetta 3, out of everything they had listed there, that they for some reason thought it prudent to put Undertale, like Deltarune, at the very, very top, which makes me think that like someone at Nintendo's marketing division is outright like trying to push Undertale onto people. Because like if you look at the Direct, like Deltarune like had a surprisingly long, lengthy trailer that it didn't really need to have, right? Like you could have just been like, yeah, Deltarune is coming to Switch. And nobody would have cared, right? Nobody would have paid attention to it. But like, you had this long, drawn-out trailer that nobody really cares about, and then you try like pushing it in the news cycle. It's noticeable, right? Like, you have people at Nintendo of America who are downright trying to push like these toxic indie games onto people. Like they did the same thing with Celeste, and they've done a handful of things with other projects. Toby Fox, I think, is one of the people that they're trying to use to like kind of westernize like the Japanese gaming media, trying to convince them to like do certain things and like pander to certain people and have certain political ideologies. We've been seeing that a lot. We've been seeing like Westerners trying to infiltrate like manga and stuff like that. Toby Fox is like the gaming equivalent of like someone like Brendan Shin, essentially, like someone who tries to say they're like a mangaka when they're not shit, and that they have a group of retards who will like promote everything they do to try and prove that Westerners can create manga when they can't. Like it's the entire concept of manga is that like it's a form of comic created by Japanese. Like it's not an art style, it's not a genre. It's a descriptor of where the material was made, right? And what it is, right? Like you don't call Korean manga, you call it like manhwa, right? Like it's that kind of thing. Like Americans should be distinguishing between American media and Japanese media in order to like sort of distinguish it, right? But what Americans are doing is they're trying to dilute manga and anime by trying to latch onto it and declare it their own, essentially, and make it more paused and liberal. Like, we've seen that with manga, we've seen that with anime, and I believe Toby Fox is trying to do that with, like, Japanese content. Like, stuff like Japanese RPGs that have no real Western equivalent. Like, four guys in a row genre, as some people have some people have put it. It's not something. It's not something you should support. Actually, it's something you should be against. Like this is one of those situations. Like this is a Gamergate style conspiracy, right? Like it's the same kind of thing in which we're having people at these companies pushing certain products ahead of others in order to try and promote an agenda. In this case, trying to get Deltarune popular and talked about, trying to keep Toby Fox relevant, but it's really not working. Like I don't see anyone really on Twitter talking about Deltarune, right? I don't see anyone really talking about Toby Fox. I don't really see people thinking that like he's going to like really put out another game ever. Like that's just not going to happen. I agree with that. Wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think Fox is already... It's the same situation with Twilight. Like, I've always said that Undertale is like the gaming equivalent of Twilight. It's the same thing. Like, teenage girls who don't read books, who just want like this to live out their fantasy of being with an immortal Chad, right? You know, rich as fuck guy. Like... will just religiously defend Twilight for that reason, right? Even though it's not very good technically, it's not good fantasy, it's not good romance, it promotes bad values, its internal lore makes no sense, like its logic, its characters are unlikable, like there's all sorts of fundamental problems with Twilight, right? Like, if you like Twilight, you should be reading other books, growing your sort of knowledge, your experience, and really starting to appreciate the stuff that's better than it. But like they don't do that because they're ignorant little shits who don't appreciate even the medium of literature, right? They don't appreciate what's actually out there. They don't appreciate like things that are much more finely written than Twilight will ever be. Stuff like Jane Austen, things like that. They don't appreciate. They don't appreciate, they don't learn, they don't grow, they don't really take deep dives into like the medium in general. Undertale fans are the same way. Like anyone who seriously thought that Undertale was unique or interesting or original, like clearly, I don't even want to say have really dove deep into video games as a whole. I want to say that they have no experience at all because I don't see any of these people like understanding games like Earthbound, games like Dragon Quest, games like Shin Megami Tensei, games like Live a Live, like all these games that Undertale like blatantly ripped off. You know, I'm like, again, this is another thing people don't talk about is like how much Toby Fox plagiarized from these 90s RPGs. Like, I don't see anybody really discussing that. Like, I don't see anyone bringing that up at all. Unless it's kind of, like, to mock, like, the idea, like, oh, man, like, don't you know, like, nothing is original anymore? Like, no, that's not an excuse for what he did, right? Oops, hang on, oops. That's not an excuse. It never was, never will be. Fox has no technical talent, right? He has no ability to make an interesting game. Like, Undertale is so terrible that I would never have given it a second glance if it wasn't for these autistic if this autistic, obsessed freaks, essentially. Undertale, without its fan base, is nothing. And I think more and more, Undertale fans are going to start latching onto other things to try and keep Undertale relevant, like in any way they can. Like we're seeing right now, they're trying to latch onto Nintendo Direct hype, trying to say that like Deltarune was a big deal for being in the Nintendo Direct. Like doubtless this was like intentional on Toby Fox's part, but is this going to boost interest in Deltarune? I don't think so. I certainly am not playing it. I'm certainly not playing the original Undertale. I'm certainly not paying attention to anything Toby Fox does. In fact, if he's associated with something like Little Town Hero in the future, I will be avoiding that project. I despise Toby Fox. I despise his fans, and I despise his games. This man is a complete fraud and needs to be addressed as such more often by the community.